All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for showing up this morning to officially welcome back Kelly Kroskoff as President of Basketball Business Operations for the...
No one anticipated this. At last, the quiet part was said aloud by the president of the Indiana Fever, the woman seated at the top of the entire organization. Not only did her remarks raise eyebrows, but they also ignited the entire basketball music community. For the first time, the reality of what's actually happening within that franchise music, politics, pressure, locker room dynamics, and the struggle between creating a champion and a brand came to light. And everything you believe to be true about Caitlin Clark's circumstances in Indiana is altered when you learn the whole story. Let's return to the actual beginning of this tale. Indiana was one of the most unmemorable teams in all of professional basketball before Caitlin Clark ever put on a Hoosier uniform. 6 victories in 2021, 5 victories in 2022, and 13 victories in 2023 are all being discussed. They were a joke for almost 10 years. No spotlight, no buzz, no fans. There would be no cameras. Seats weren't being filled by the spectators. And whatever the Fever had been, the WNBA landscape had utterly moved on. That was the truth. A once proud franchise turned into an afterthought. However, despite their best efforts, no one in that front office could have scripted what transpired. When the first overall choice in the 2024 WNBA draft entered the room, things completely changed. Not only did Caitlin Clark lower the temperature, the entire league was altered by her. Everywhere she performed, the crowds were sold out. TV ratings that broke records, jerseys that were flying off the racks, and a media frenzy that had never been witnessed in women's basketball since music, honestly, ever. I mean, the organization had to make a decision in the midst of that eruption. Would they attempt to steer the wave in a different direction or ride it? At that point, the entire narrative becomes intriguing. Because the front office made a decision that surprised many people just when the Fever needed someone at the top who knew exactly what they had, a once-in-a-generation athlete who was single-handedly changing what was possible for women's sports. Kelly Kroskoff was appointed as their new president of business operations and basketball. It made sense on paper. Kroskoff had previously founded the Fever, was a member of the team that won the 2012 championship, and had first-hand knowledge of the organization. She was introduced by the squad with all the anticipated excitement. However, something in her messaging from her first news conference sparked concerns that many at the moment ignored, but that would come back to haunt the entire company months later. No one noticed the warning signs until it was too late, since they were hidden in plain sight. This is the moment when everything fell apart. July of 2025. Caitlin Clark's injury absence is a problem for the Fever due to a groin problem that has been plaguing her for weeks. Clark has only participated in 11 games so far this season. Fans are irritated. The club is on the verge of making the playoffs. There is increasing pressure in the midst of all of that. On the same day that video from Kroskoff's first news conference inexplicably resurfaces on social media, the internet discovers something hidden in that speech from October 2024 that the majority of people had completely ignored. This is about the Indiana Fever, Kroskoff stated, looking directly into the cameras during the news conference. Yes, Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston are our foundational players, and we plan to keep adding to them. However, I want this squad to be a national leader and a long-lasting brand like Apple or whatever. Something like Apple. It only required that. The video became viral in a matter of hours, and the fanbase exploded. Because that wasn't a vision that many people heard in that sentence. It served as a caution. The Fever front office had never witnessed such a response. Fans weren't only angry, they were organized, boisterous, and hard to ignore when they were angry. Because of what Apple actually accomplished, the comparison to Apple struck a different chord. One visionary, Steve Jobs, served as the foundation for their entire identity. And the entire empire almost fell apart as soon as he left. Therefore, when Clark supporters heard the Fever president use that precise analogy, they perceived something in it that seemed illuminating, as if the organization already viewed Clark as a component rather than the focal point. One fan responded on social media to enduring brands that embrace their ideas. Steve Jobs became Apple's star and visionary, making the company a global icon. Another fan didn't hold back, either. They claim that when Clark eventually decides she's had enough of a front office dumpster fire, the Fever will acknowledge that they lost the greatest chance in women's sports history. The same basic emotion pervaded the message boards, comment sections, and replies. You don't minimize the most significant player this team has ever had, and you don't stop focusing on her. There was more to the backlash than just noise. It was a decision. And someone in that organization realized just how dire things were becoming. Because Krauskopf's entire exact account disappeared a few hours after the video went viral. Absent entirely. Where there had been a social media presence only a few days prior, there was quiet instead of a message or an explanation. This is where it becomes even more complex. Because the players on the court, the ones who actually suit up next to Caitlin Clark every night, were telling an entirely different and far more honest tale while the front staff was being attacked online. One of Clark's closest teammates, Lexi Hull, went down for a profile in Glamour magazine and didn't hold back. Hull made a statement that practically no one wearing a Fever uniform had previously been willing to make public, but that everyone in the S had pushed the hardest. That she caused trouble in the changing area. She was disliked by the players. That no team could endure the fractures caused by the attention and celebrity. In September 2024, Hall of Famer Cheryl Swoops said on a podcast that important players on the Fever were subtly expressing their disinterest in attending. That they were no longer able to handle the circumstances around Clark. It quickly spread. It became part of the background noise that accompanied the Fever into their second season together, or it was replayed everywhere music. Unless, of course, Clark herself was forced to appear as a guest on a different March Madness program that was hosted by Subbard, and Diana She tackled it head-on. She wasn't upset. She didn't act defensively. She was remarkably composed about it. In essence, you grow accustomed to people believing they are aware of what goes on behind closed doors while in fact they are not. Additionally, the teammates that were there in that locker room continued to support her. In the 2025 playoffs, Clark's teammates swarmed the floor once she recovered from her injuries. They interrupted her interview after the game. They arrived for her at moments that no one had planned. The jubilation in the locker room after the Fever won the Commissioner Cup was entirely sincere. Players bonded in a way that didn't read like performance, laughing and genuinely delighted for one another. This is what no one in the media has yet to compile. Whether or not Caitlin Clark's teammates liked her was never the main focus of the Fever narrative. It concerned whether the front office, which was in charge of them all, was prepared to surround her with the appropriate elements and give the project their whole attention. The gap is that because the ties were genuine on the court level, Aaliyah, Boston had a tight relationship with Clark. Lexi Hull was guarded. Before they had even played a game together, new players like Sophie Cunningham were raving about Clark. The rookie who made the final roster, Michaela Timpson, expressed real admiration for Clark in a way that is impossible to mimic. Following the expansion draft, Clark posted comments on Instagram for two of her teammates, saying things like "My Aussie for life" for Chloe BBY and "Cub, I love you" for Christy Wallace. The love wasn't fake, these were genuine connections. However, connections don't win titles on their own. And that's the tension that was sitting at the center of everything. The whole content of Kelly Krauskopf's remarks from that October 2024 press conference, not just the Apple soundbite, contained something that many people overlooked in their haste to express displeasure. Krauskopf discussed the long game when she stated that she wanted the Fever to be a lasting brand. She stated that sometimes it takes a generation to reach the next level, and that Caitlin Clark was 10 years old when Indiana won its lone championship in 2012. Perhaps the organization had been working for someone else all along, sowing the seeds for a 10-year-old someplace who would find inspiration in what the Fever was doing at the time. It all relies on your perception of the front office's true priorities as to whether you consider that to be vision or misdirection. However, this cannot be disputed. Due to a brand, the fans who attended the Fever beginning in 2024 did not show up. A player was the reason they came. They spent hours behind the wheel. They made payments that the WNBA had never seen before. The league had never anticipated the number of people that watched games. Additionally, ticket sales decreased when Clark's injuries prevented him from playing in ways that were quantifiable, recorded, and openly acknowledged. TV ratings declined. There was no denying the stark, brutal reality of what Clark meant to that franchise. However, the messaging from the top of the organization kept returning to the team, the institution, and the brand as though the person generating all of that attention was somehow apart from it. One statement made by Kroskopf during that press conference stood out from the others. She claimed that you would want to play with Caitlin Clark if you are an intelligent basketball player, and you see how she plays. And since the Fever's ability to recruit had subtly developed into one of the most intriguing storylines in the WNBA that turned out to be more true than even she probably realized at the time. In order to travel to Indiana, players had to accept wage reductions. The chance to play with Clark was the deciding factor for veterans. Clark's fan base wasn't limited to packing venues. Players wanted to be a part of something greater than a typical WNBA season because of the atmosphere it was fostering. In spite of themselves, the Fever had become as one of the league's most sought-after locations. Because of a basketball player who improved everyone around her and packed buildings wherever she went, not because of a brand strategy. Let's go on to 2026 and whatever the Fever will be doing in the future. In the WNBA expansion draft, the team lost 2 players, Christy Wallace to Toronto, Chloe Bby to Portland. Clark herself had to deal with a season that was meant to be her breakthrough second year, but instead it was a nightmare of injuries that kept her to just 13 games throughout the regular season. She nevertheless made the All-Star game despite averaging 16.5 points, 8.5 assists, and 5 rebounds in her outings. Even while she was sitting on the sidelines in civilian clothing, still was the league's center of attention. Beneath it all, the Fever were developing a $78 million performance facility that Kroskopf referred to as the foundation for the next generation. The music facility, which won't even open until 2027, is intended to be the kind of home base that draws top talent for years to come. The components are in place. The concern is whether those in charge of making decisions above the court are aware of what they have and whether they plan to address it before it's too late. The larger reality, which lies beneath every argument concerning the Fever's head office, every issue with Clark's teammates, and every heated comment regarding tension in the locker room, is actually far more straightforward than any of it. In just 1 year, this team went from winning 5 games a season to being the most watched team in women's basketball. It's not a reconstruction. It's a revolution. Furthermore, brand strategy decks do not lead to revolutions. They occur as a result of once-in-a-generation performers who make everyone around them more fascinating music, more competitive, and more entertaining to watch. Fans saw the risk in the Fever president's statement of creating a brand on par with Apple, which set up a tempest. The same risk that doomed other franchises that attempted to replace their star with a logo. Nobody is more aware of the truth than the athletes in that locker room. They have seen it up close and even played by it. And what they repeatedly state in every social media post and interview playing with Caitlin Clark isn't only different, as evidenced by every poignant sideline interaction and post. It's a chance that doesn't present itself twice. It would be beneficial for the Fever to ensure that those in charge of that organization have the same sentiments. The window is open at the moment, because one thing is guaranteed: the existence of the opportunity is not the question. The question is whether they're bold enough to truly. Nobody saw this coming. At last, the quiet part was said aloud by the president of the Indiana Fever, the woman seated at the top of the entire organization. Furthermore, her remarks raised more than just eyebrows. It ignited the world of basketball. For the first time, the reality of what's actually happening within that franchise, the locker room dynamics, the politics, the pressure, the music, and the struggle between creating a champion and a brand all broke down. And everything you believe to be true about Caitlin Clark's circumstances in Indiana is altered when you learn the whole story. Let's return to the actual beginning of this tale. Indiana was one of the most unmemorable teams in all of professional basketball before Caitlin Clark.